never thought I'd be the kind of person to believe in Bigfoot until the night I hit one with my Ford Ranger on a remote logging road in the Cascade Mountains of Washington State. And what happened in the hours that followed taught me that some legends exist for a reason. Let me tell you this story from the beginning, because even now, 25 years later, I still can't quite believe it happened. It was October of 1996. I was 45 years old, working as a field researcher for the Washington State Department of Natural Resources. My job was to survey timber stands in remote areas, which meant I spent a lot of time alone on forgotten roads that hadn't seen traffic in months. I'd been doing this work for nearly 15 years, and I thought I'd seen everything these forests had to offer. Black bears, mountain lions, even a wolverine once, but nothing could have prepared me for that night. I remember the date exactly, October 23, 1996. It was a Wednesday, and I was running late getting back to my truck after a long day of surveying old-growth stands near the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. The sun sets early in late October up in the mountains, and by 6:30 p.m., I was driving through complete darkness on a narrow dirt road that wound through thick stands of Douglas fir and western hemlock. My headlights cut through the autumn mist that had settled over everything like a cold, damp blanket. I had the radio tuned to a classic rock station out of Portland, though the signal kept cutting in and out this deep in the mountains. Tom Petty was playing Free Fallin' when it happened. One moment the road ahead was empty, just two tire tracks disappearing into the fog. The next moment, something massive stepped out of the tree line directly into my path. I slammed on the brakes, but there wasn't enough time. The Ford hit whatever it was with a sickening thud that I felt through the entire frame of the truck. The impact wasn't as severe as it could have been. I'd managed to slow down considerably, but it was enough to knock the creature off its feet. My truck skidded to a stop at an angle across the narrow road, the engine stalling out in the sudden silence. For a long moment, I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, my heart hammering in my chest. Steam or fog, I couldn't tell which, rose from the hood of my truck. The headlights pointed off into the trees at a crazy angle, casting strange shadows through the mist. I couldn't see what I'd hit. My first thought was that I'd struck a bear. It had to be a bear. We had plenty of black bears in these mountains, and they could get pretty big. But something about the size and shape of what I'd glimpsed in that split second before impact didn't quite fit. It had been tall, much taller than any bear I'd ever seen standing on its hind legs. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds, debating what to do. Every survival instinct I had was screaming at me to restart the truck and get the hell out of there. But my conscience wouldn't let me. If I'd hit an animal, I needed to at least assess the damage, see if it was suffering. It was the right thing to do, even if every hair on the back of my neck was standing up. I reached under my seat and pulled out my heavy-duty Maglite flashlight, the kind that could double as a club if necessary. Then I grabbed my first aid kit from behind the seat. I didn't know what good a first aid kit would do for an injured bear, but it felt better than going out there empty-handed. I also took my can of bear spray from the door pocket and clipped it to my belt. The October air hit me like a wall of cold when I opened the truck door. It smelled like wet earth, pine needles, and something else, something musky and wild that I couldn't quite place. I stepped out onto the dirt road, my boots crunching on loose gravel, and swept the flashlight beam across the area in front of my truck. At first, I didn't see anything. Then I moved the light to the right, toward the ditch that ran alongside the road, and that's when I saw it. My breath caught in my throat. My mind struggled to process what I was seeing. It wasn't a bear. The creature lay on its side in the shallow ditch, partially covered by ferns and underbrush. It was massive, easily 7.5 feet tall, maybe 8 feet. Its body was covered in dark reddish-brown hair that looked almost auburn in the beam of my flashlight. The hair was longer and shaggier than any bear's, hanging in thick tangles that were matted with mud and forest debris. But it was the shape that made my stomach drop. The proportions were all wrong for a bear. The limbs were too long, too human-like in their structure. I could see one arm draped across its torso, and the hand, God, the hand looked almost human but larger, with thick fingers and dark leathery skin on the palm. I stood there frozen, the flashlight trembling in my grip, as my brain tried to reconcile what my eyes were seeing with what I knew to be possible. This couldn't be real. Bigfoot wasn't real. It was a legend, a myth, something people claimed to see but never really did. There were no credible photos, no bodies, no proof, except there was a body right in front of me. The creature's chest rose and fell with shallow, labored breaths. It was alive, but clearly hurt. I could see where my truck had struck it. There was a darkening patch on its right shoulder and upper arm that looked like it might be blood, though it was hard to tell through all that hair. I should have been terrified. Part of me was. But another part of me, the part that had spent 15 years studying wildlife, the part that had always been drawn to the natural world and its mysteries, was absolutely mesmerized. And beneath both the fear and the fascination was something else, a growing sense of responsibility. I'd hit this creature with my truck. Whatever it was, I'd hurt it, and now it needed help. I took a cautious step closer, then another. The creature didn't move except for the rise and fall of its breathing. Up close, I could see more details. Its face was partially turned away from me, but I could make out a heavy brow ridge, a flat nose, and what looked like dark skin beneath the hair on its cheeks. The smell was stronger now, that musky, wild scent, but not unpleasant. It smelled like the forest itself, like moss and earth and rain. The creature's breathing became more ragged, and I noticed its shoulder was definitely injured. Dark blood matted the fur around the impact site, and I could see the muscle underneath tensing with each breath. I knew I had to make a decision fast. Leave it here and drive away, pretending this never happened, or try to help it, even though I had no idea what I was dealing with. I thought about my daughter, Rebecca, back home in Olympia. She was 17, getting ready to apply to colleges, and she'd always loved those nature documentaries on PBS. She believed in things like this, cryptids, unexplained phenomena, mysteries in the wild places. I'd always been the skeptical one, the scientist, telling her that if Bigfoot existed, we'd have found concrete evidence by now. If she could see me now, she'd never let me hear the end of it. The thought of Rebecca made my decision for me. I couldn't leave this creature here to suffer, possibly die, because of my truck. Whether it was a Sasquatch, some unknown primate species, or something else entirely, it was a living being in pain, and I had caused that pain. I knelt down a few feet away from it, setting my flashlight on the ground so it illuminated the creature. My hands were shaking as I opened my first aid kit. I had bandages, antiseptic, gauze, all things meant for human injuries, but they'd have to do. I also had a couple of old wool blankets in my truck that I used when I had to spend unexpected nights in the field. The October night was getting colder, and I had no idea if this creature was going into shock. "Easy," I said softly, not even sure why I was talking to it. "I'm going to help you. I'm sorry I hit you. I didn't see you until it was too late." The creature's breathing changed slightly when I spoke. Its chest expanded with a deeper breath, and I saw one of its hands twitch. It was aware of me. That realization sent a fresh wave of adrenaline through my system, but I forced myself to stay calm. I went back to my truck and grabbed the 2 blankets from behind the seat, along with my water jug. When I returned, I carefully draped one blanket over the lower half of the creature's body. The October air was dropping into the low 40s, and I could see my breath forming clouds in the beam of my flashlight. The wound on its shoulder was worse than I'd initially thought. The skin beneath the matted fur was torn, about 4 inches long, probably from where it had impacted with the corner of my truck's bumper. It was bleeding steadily, but not hemorrhaging. I'd seen worse injuries on deer that had been hit by vehicles, and many of them survived if they got away from the road. But this wasn't a deer, and this creature wasn't going anywhere under its own power anytime soon. I unscrewed the cap on my water jug and poured some over the wound, trying to clean away the blood and dirt. The creature flinched when the cold water hit its shoulder, and I heard a sound, a low, rumbling vocalization that came from deep in its chest. It wasn't aggressive, more like a groan of pain. The sound was hauntingly human, yet distinctly not. "I know it hurts," I said, keeping my voice low and steady, "but I need to clean it out. You've got dirt and debris in there." I used gauze pads to gently dab at the wound, removing the worst of the contamination. The creature remained still, though I could feel the tension in its massive frame. It was tolerating my presence, my touch, which seemed remarkable given that I'd just hit it with a truck. Maybe it understood I was trying to help. Maybe it was too injured to care. Either way, I was grateful it wasn't fighting me. As I worked, I got a better look at the creature's anatomy. Its arm was incredibly muscular, with definition that suggested enormous strength. The hand near me had fingernails, or maybe they were more like thick claws, that were dark and curved. The palm had calluses that looked like they came from a lifetime of gripping branches and rocks. This was an animal built for the forest, adapted for climbing, traversing rough terrain, surviving in the wild places where humans rarely went. After cleaning the wound as best I could, I applied antibiotic ointment from my kit and covered it with a large bandage pad, using medical tape to secure it through the fur. It wasn't perfect. The tape wouldn't stick well to the hair, but it was better than nothing. I wrapped gauze around the shoulder and under the arm as much as I could, trying to keep pressure on the wound to stop the bleeding. The whole time I worked, I kept expecting the creature to wake up, to react violently, to grab me with one of those massive hands and crush me like a tin can. But it never did. It just lay there, breathing, occasionally making that low rumbling sound, watching me through eyes that I finally got a glimpse of when its head shifted slightly. Those eyes stopped me cold. They were dark, deep brown, almost black in the flashlight beam, but they weren't animal eyes. There was intelligence there, awareness, something that looked almost human, but carried a wisdom that seemed ancient. The creature was watching me work on its shoulder, and in that moment, I felt like I was being evaluated, judged, assessed by something far older and more mysterious than I could comprehend. "It's okay," I whispered, not breaking eye contact. "I'm just trying to help." The eyes blinked slowly, then closed again. The tension in the creature's body seemed to ease slightly. I finished bandaging the shoulder and sat back on my heels, assessing my work. It wasn't great. I wasn't a veterinarian, and I certainly wasn't a cryptozoologist, but it was the best I could do with what I had. The bleeding had slowed considerably, which was good. The creature's breathing was still shallow, but more regular now. The question now was, what the hell do I do next? I couldn't load this thing into my truck even if I wanted to. It probably weighed 400 pounds, maybe more. I couldn't call for help. My cell phone had no signal this deep in the mountains, and even if it did, who would I call? 911? Yes, hello? I hit Bigfoot with my truck and need an ambulance? The Forest Service? They'd think I was drunk or crazy, and I'd probably lose my job for wasting their time. I looked at my watch. It was nearly 7:30 p.m. I was at least an hour's drive from the nearest town, a little place called Randall that had a population of maybe 500 people. My supervisor, Tom, wasn't expecting me back until tomorrow afternoon. I was completely alone out here with an injured Sasquatch and no plan whatsoever. The temperature continued to drop. I could feel the cold seeping through my jacket, and I knew the creature had to be feeling it too, despite all that fur. I draped the second blanket over its upper body, being careful around the injured shoulder as I stood there in the darkness, surrounded by ancient trees and October mist, listening to the labored breathing of a creature that supposedly didn't exist. The absurdity of the situation finally hit me. I started laughing, quietly at first, then harder, until I had to sit down on the cold ground because my legs felt weak. Here I was, Dale Patterson, a 45-year-old field researcher who'd spent his entire career studying trees and wildlife using scientific methods and data collection, providing first aid to Bigfoot on a logging road in the Cascade Mountains. If anyone had told me this morning that this was how my day would end, I would have recommended they see a psychiatrist. The laughter faded as quickly as it came, replaced by the sobering reality of my situation. I was sitting on a cold dirt road in the middle of nowhere with an injured cryptid and rapidly approaching darkness that was absolute in these mountains. The mist was getting thicker, turning into a light drizzle that made everything slick and miserable. I made a decision. I couldn't move the creature, and I couldn't leave it here alone in this condition. That meant I was spending the night right here on this logging road, keeping watch over something that the entire scientific community insisted didn't exist. I went back to my truck and moved it off to the side of the road as much as possible, just in case another vehicle came through, though that was highly unlikely. This road hadn't been actively logged in at least 3 years, and it didn't lead anywhere except deeper into the national forest. Still, better safe than sorry. I gathered everything useful from the truck: my camping stove, a thermos of coffee that was still warm from this morning, some beef jerky and granola bars, my sleeping bag, a tarp, and my emergency kit. I also grabbed my Nikon camera from the passenger seat. My hands hesitated over it for a moment. Part of me wanted documentation, proof of what I was experiencing. But another part of me, the part that was looking into those intelligent, aware eyes, felt like taking photos would be a violation of trust. I left the camera in the truck, using the tarp and some rope from my emergency kit. I rigged up a makeshift shelter over the creature and myself, anchoring it to nearby trees and weighting down the edges with rocks. It wasn't much, but it would keep the worst of the rain off us. I set up my camping stove under the edge of the tarp and got some water heating for instant soup. The small flame provided a little circle of warmth and light that made the situation feel slightly less surreal. The creature hadn't moved much in the past hour, except for the steady rise and fall of its breathing. I checked the bandage on its shoulder periodically. The bleeding had stopped, which was a good sign. The wound wasn't deep enough to be life-threatening, but I worried about infection. Out here in the damp forest, bacteria could take hold quickly. I poured myself a cup of soup and sat with my back against a fallen log, the sleeping bag draped over my shoulders, watching the creature in the dim light from my flashlight. The drizzle pattered on the tarp above us, and somewhere in the darkness, an owl hooted, one of the great horned owls that hunted these forests at night. "You know," I said quietly, speaking more to myself than to the creature, "I've been working in these mountains for 15 years. I thought I knew these forests, thought I understood what lived here and what didn't." I took a sip of the soup, feeling it warm me from the inside. My daughter's going to love this story. That is, if I ever figure out how to tell it. "Hey, Rebecca, remember how I always said Bigfoot wasn't real?" Well, funny story. The creature's eyes opened at the sound of my voice. In the soft glow of the flashlight, they looked more brown than black, with flecks of amber near the pupils. It watched me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not hostile, not fearful, just observant. "Are you thirsty?" I asked, realizing how absurd it was to be having a conversation with a Sasquatch. But something about those eyes made it feel natural, almost necessary. "I've got water. I don't know if you can drink from a bottle, but I can pour some into my cup if you want." I didn't really expect a response, but the creature's eyes shifted to the water jug sitting near my camp stove, then back to me. It was subtle, but it was definitely intentional. My hands were shaking again as I poured water into my metal camping cup. I approached slowly, holding the cup out in front of me. "I'm going to come closer now. I just want to give you this. You've lost some blood, and you need to stay hydrated." The creature didn't move as I knelt beside it. Up close, I could see more details of its face: the broad, flat nose, the heavy brow ridge that reminded me of reconstructions I'd seen of Homo erectus in museums, the thin lips that were almost hidden beneath the hair surrounding its mouth. But the eyes were what held me. They were so expressive, so aware. I held the cup near its mouth, tilting it slightly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the creature's lips parted, revealing large, flat teeth that looked surprisingly human, and it drank. The sound of it swallowing was loud in the quiet night. When the cup was empty, those eyes met mine again, and I could have sworn I saw something like gratitude in them. "You're welcome," I said softly. I refilled the cup twice more, and the creature drank each time. On the third refill, one of its hands moved slowly, deliberately, and those thick fingers wrapped around my wrist. Not aggressively, not painfully, just holding. The touch was warm despite the cold night air. and I could feel the calluses on its palm, rough against my skin. We stayed like that for a long moment, connected, two beings from different worlds sharing a strange, impossible moment on a forgotten logging road. Then the hand released me and settled back against the creature's chest. I returned to my spot against the log, my heart pounding. That touch had felt significant somehow, like a communication I didn't fully understand but could feel the weight of. This wasn't just an animal. This was something else, something that straddled the line between the wild and the human in a way that made my scientific training feel inadequate. The hours passed slowly. I dozed off a few times, jerking awake at every sound from the forest, the snap of a branch, the rustle of wind through the trees, the distant call of a coyote. Each time I woke, I checked on the creature. Its breathing remained steady and the bandage was holding. Around 2 a.m., I changed the dressing on its shoulder, working by flashlight while the creature watched me with those patient, knowing eyes. "I don't know what you are," I said as I worked, speaking in a low voice that wouldn't carry beyond our little shelter. "I don't know where you came from or how many of you are out here. But I know you're real, and I know you're in pain, and I know that I'm responsible for that. So I'm going to stay here until you're well enough to leave, okay? However long that takes." The creature made a sound, that low, rumbling vocalization I'd heard before, but softer this time, almost gentle. It sounded like acknowledgement. By 4 a.m. I was exhausted. The adrenaline that had been keeping me alert was wearing off, replaced by bone-deep fatigue. I'd been up since 5 a.m. the previous morning, had spent all day surveying timber in rough terrain, and now I'd spent half the night providing medical care to a cryptid. My body was demanding sleep. I moved my sleeping bag closer to the creature, close enough that I could reach out and check on it without having to stand up. The warmth from its body was radiating outward, and I found myself grateful for it. The temperature had dropped into the 30s, and even with my sleeping bag and the tarp overhead, I was cold. "I'm going to sleep for a bit," I told the creature. "But I'm right here if you need anything, just, I don't know, make a noise or something." I closed my eyes, listening to the rain and the creature's breathing. And somewhere in that strange symphony of sounds, I drifted off to sleep. I woke to pale gray light filtering through the trees and the tarp. Dawn was breaking, though the sun itself was hidden behind heavy clouds. The rain had stopped, but everything was soaked. The tarp, the ground, my sleeping bag. My back ached from sleeping on the hard ground, and my neck was stiff from the awkward angle against the log. The first thing I did was check on the creature. It was awake and watching me, but something had changed overnight. The eyes that met mine were more alert, more focused. The creature shifted slightly, testing its injured shoulder, and I saw it wince, or at least I saw something in its expression that suggested pain. "Easy," I said, sitting up and immediately regretting it as my back protested. "That shoulder's going to hurt for a while. You need to keep still and let it heal." I checked the bandage again. No fresh bleeding, which was excellent news. The wound looked better in the morning light, cleaner, less inflamed than I'd feared. Maybe the cold night air had helped prevent infection. I heated up some water on my camping stove and made instant coffee, the steam rising into the cold morning air. The creature watched my every movement with those intelligent eyes, tracking me as I moved around our makeshift camp. I offered it more water, which it accepted, drinking more eagerly than it had during the night. As I sipped my coffee, I studied the creature in the better light of morning. Its fur was a deep reddish brown, almost mahogany in color, with lighter patches around the face and chest. The hair was coarser than I'd initially thought, more like the guard hairs on a bear, but longer and more varied in length. Some patches were matted with dried mud and bits of forest debris. Pine needles, small twigs, fragments of leaves, suggesting this creature spent a lot of time moving through dense underbrush. The face was extraordinary. In the daylight, I could see the bone structure beneath the skin and fur, high prominent cheekbones, a heavy jaw, that massive brow ridge that cast shadows over the eyes. The nose was broad and flat with large nostrils. The ears were small and close to the head, almost hidden in the surrounding hair. It was like looking at something that evolution had specifically designed for life in these mountains, a body built for strength, endurance, and survival in harsh conditions. But it was the hands that fascinated me most. They were enormous, easily twice the size of my own, with long fingers and opposable thumbs. The palms were dark and leathery, covered in thick calluses that spoke of a lifetime of gripping, climbing, and manipulating objects. These weren't the paws of an animal. They were hands capable of fine motor control, of using tools, of doing things that required thought and planning. The creature shifted again, this time managing to prop itself up slightly on its good arm. The movement was careful, deliberate, testing the limits of its injury. It groaned softly, that same low rumbling sound, and I could see the effort it was taking. "Hey, take it easy," I said, moving closer. "You don't want to tear that wound open again." The creature's eyes met mine, and then it did something that nearly made me drop my coffee cup. It raised its good hand and pointed, not at me, not at the bandage, but at something beyond our shelter. I followed the gesture and saw it was pointing deeper into the forest, in the direction it had come from the night before. "You want to go back?" I asked. "Back into the forest?" The hand moved again, a slight nodding motion, then pointed at itself and then at the trees again. The message was clear. It wanted to return to the forest, to wherever it had come from. "I don't know if that's a good idea," I said. "You're injured. You need rest, time to heal. If you try to move around too much, you could make it worse." But even as I said it, I understood. This creature didn't belong out here on this logging road, under a tarp, being cared for by a human. It belonged in the deep forest, in the wild places where it had lived its entire life. Staying here was unnatural for it, probably stressful, maybe even dangerous, if another vehicle happened to come down this road. The creature tried to sit up, fully, and I could see the determination in its movements. It was going to try to leave whether I helped it or not. Okay, I said, holding up my hands. "But let me check that bandage first, and we'll take this slow. You rush it, and you're going to hurt yourself worse." I carefully unwrapped the gauze and checked the wound. It looked good, no signs of infection, edges starting to close up. Whatever healing factor this creature had, it was impressive. An injury like this on a human would take days to even begin healing, but this looked like it was already well into the process. I cleaned it again with antiseptic, applied fresh antibiotic ointment, and put on a new bandage. This time, I used more tape, securing it as best I could through the thick fur. "This needs to stay clean and dry," I told it, knowing full well that dry was probably impossible in these wet mountains. "Try not to move that shoulder too much for the next few days, okay?" The creature watched me work with what I interpreted as patience. When I was finished, it began the slow, painful process of standing up. I moved back to give it space, watching anxiously as it rolled onto its good side, then pushed itself up to a sitting position. Even sitting, it was massive. Its head was level with mine when I was standing. The creature paused there, breathing heavily from the effort, and I could see it was fighting dizziness or pain, or both. I grabbed my water jug and held it out. "Here, drink some more before you try to stand." It took the jug from me, took it in its own hands, and lifted it to its mouth, drinking deeply. The sight of those huge hands manipulating the plastic jug with surprising gentleness was surreal. This was tool use, clear and undeniable. This creature had cognitive abilities far beyond what any known ape possessed. When it finished drinking, it handed the jug back to me with deliberate care, making sure I had a good grip before releasing it. Then it began the process of standing. It took several minutes and clearly caused significant pain, but eventually the creature was on its feet, standing at its full height for the first time since I'd hit it. My estimate had been conservative. It was easily 8 feet tall, maybe even 8.5. Standing next to it, I felt like a child, next to an adult. The sheer size and presence of the creature was overwhelming. It stood there swaying slightly, one hand pressed against a tree for support, the injured shoulder held carefully still. Then it looked down at me, and in that moment I felt like I was being seen, truly seen, by something ancient and wise. The creature's good hand reached out and touched my shoulder, much the way I might touch a friend in thanks. The gesture was unmistakable in its meaning. Then it turned and began walking into the forest, moving slowly and carefully, favoring its injured side. I followed at a distance, not wanting to let it go just yet, needing to see that it would be okay. The creature moved through the undergrowth, with surprising grace despite its injury, ducking under low branches, stepping over logs, navigating the terrain with the ease of something that had lived its entire life in these woods. We walked for maybe 10 minutes, moving steadily away from the logging road and deeper into the old-growth forest. The trees here were massive, Douglas firs and western red cedars that had been growing for centuries, their trunks so wide it would take 3 people holding hands to encircle them. The canopy overhead was thick enough that even in October, with many deciduous trees bare, the forest floor was dim and quiet. The creature stopped at a particularly dense thicket of vine maple and salal, a natural fortress of vegetation that would provide cover and shelter. It turned back to look at me one last time, and in that look I saw acknowledgement, recognition, and something that might have been respect. "You're going to be okay," I said, my voice catching slightly. "Keep that wound clean, rest, heal." The creature made a sound, a vocalization I hadn't heard before. It was higher pitched than the rumbling groans, almost musical in quality, with a resonance that seemed to vibrate in my chest. Then it raised one hand in what could only be described as a wave, a deliberate gesture of farewell, and disappeared into the thicket. I stood there for a long time, staring at the spot where it had vanished, listening to the sounds of the forest returning to normal. A Steller's jay called from somewhere above me. A squirrel chattered angrily at my presence. The wind rustled through the upper branches of the cedars. When I finally turned and walked back to my truck, the sun was breaking through the clouds, sending shafts of golden light through the gaps in the canopy. The rain had stopped completely, and the forest smelled fresh and clean, that distinctive Pacific Northwest scent of wet earth, cedar and Douglas fir. I packed up my camp quickly, rolling up the tarp, gathering my supplies, loading everything back into the truck. I kept expecting to feel different somehow, changed by what had happened. But mostly, I just felt tired and slightly surreal, like I'd been living in a dream for the past 12 hours. Before I left, I walked back to the spot where I'd first found the creature lying in the ditch. The undergrowth was disturbed, the ferns bent and broken. There were clear impressions in the soft earth, massive footprints that were unmistakably not from any known animal. Each print was at least 17 inches long and 7 inches wide at the ball, with 5 distinct toe impressions. I stood there looking at those prints, and the scientist in me warred with the part of me that had just spent the night caring for a creature I'd been taught didn't exist. Every instinct said I should document this, take photos, make plaster casts, report this to someone. This was potentially the discovery of the century, proof that Sasquatch was real. But then I thought about those intelligent eyes watching me with trust. I thought about the gentle way the creature had taken the water jug from my hands. I thought about that final wave, that gesture of farewell between 2 beings who had shared something extraordinary. I walked back to my truck without taking a single photograph. Some things, I realized, were more important than proof. Some moments were meant to be experienced, not documented. And some creatures deserved to remain in the shadows, protected by their mystery. The drive back to civilization felt strange. I kept the radio off, preferring silence, trying to process what had happened. Every time I rounded a curve or crested a hill, part of me expected to see another one of those creatures standing in the road. But the forest remained empty, keeping its secrets. I stopped at a small diner in Randall around 10 a.m. The place was called Betty's Kitchen, a classic American roadside establishment with red vinyl booths, a long counter with swivel stools and the smell of coffee and bacon grease hanging in the air. A handful of locals sat scattered around the room, loggers mostly, judging by their Carhartt jackets and work boots, along with a couple of elderly men who looked like they'd been coming to this same diner every morning for the past 40 years. I ordered coffee and eggs, sitting at the counter, catching fragments of conversation around me. The Seahawks were having a rough season. Someone's truck had broken down again. The mill over in Morton might be laying off more workers. Normal conversations, normal concerns, normal life. I felt like I'd returned from another planet. "You look like you've seen a ghost," the waitress said as she refilled my coffee. Her name tag said Linda. She was probably in her 50s, with short gray hair and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. "Something like that," I said, managing a tired smile. "Rough night in the woods? Forest Service?" she asked, nodding at the DNR patch on my jacket. "Yeah." "Timber surveys up near Gifford-Pinchot. See anything interesting out there?" I thought about how to answer that question. I thought about those eyes watching me in the darkness, about hands that could crush me, but chose instead to be gentle, about a wave goodbye from something that supposedly didn't exist. "Just trees," I said finally. "Lots of trees." Linda laughed and moved on to refill other cups, and I sat there eating my eggs, thinking about lies and truths and the spaces in between. I made it back to Olympia by early afternoon. My house was a small craftsman bungalow on the west side of town, with a yard full of Douglas firs and a view of the Olympics on clear days. I'd lived there for 12 years since the divorce, just me and Rebecca, until she'd started spending more time with friends and preparing for college. She was home when I arrived, sitting at the kitchen table with textbooks and papers spread out in front of her. She looked up when I came in, her face brightening. "Dad, how was the survey?" Rebecca had my ex-wife's dark hair and my blue eyes, and at 17, she was already taller than her mother. She wore a flannel shirt over a Nirvana t-shirt, very 1996 Pacific Northwest teenager, and had a pencil stuck behind her ear. "It was eventful," I said, setting my field pack down by the door. "Eventful? How? Did you finally see a spotted owl?" I poured myself a glass of water and sat down across from her, studying her face. She believed in mysteries, in things that science hadn't explained yet. She'd always been open-minded in a way I'd lost somewhere along the way to becoming a scientist. "If I told anyone, it should be her." "Rebecca," I said slowly, "what would you say if I told you I saw something in the forest that I can't explain?" Her eyes lit up immediately. "Like what? Was it Bigfoot?" She was grinning, teasing, expecting me to laugh at the suggestion, but I didn't laugh. I just looked at her, and something in my expression made her smile fade. "Dad? Are you serious right now?" "I hit something with my truck last night," I said carefully. "Something big. I thought it was a bear at first, but..." I trailed off, not sure how to continue. "But what?" I shook my head. "Never mind. I'm just tired. It was probably a bear after all. The darkness, the fog, it plays tricks on your eyes." Rebecca studied me for a long moment, her head tilted slightly to the side. "You're not telling me something. There's nothing to tell. Just a tired old man who spent the night in the cold and is seeing things that aren't there." But she knew me too well. "You've never been a person who sees things that aren't there. You're the most rational, scientific person I know. You don't even believe in Santa Claus, and you're supposed to be a parent." That made me laugh, breaking the tension. "I let you believe in Santa until you were 8. That's respectable." "Whatever, Dad." She went back to her homework, but I could tell she was thinking about what I'd said. "If you did see something weird out there, you know you can tell me, right?" "I won't think you're crazy." "I know, sweetie. Thanks." The next few weeks passed in a strange blur. I went back to work, completing my timber surveys, filing my reports, attending meetings about harvest plans and wildlife corridors. Everything was normal on the surface, but I couldn't stop thinking about that night on the logging road. I found myself researching Bigfoot sightings in my spare time, reading accounts from other people who claimed to have encountered these creatures. Most of the stories were obviously fabricated or the result of misidentification, but a few, just a few, had a ring of authenticity that made me wonder. There was a report from 1994, just 2 years earlier, from a hiker near Mount St. Helens who described finding a sick or injured Sasquatch near a stream and watching it for several hours. The hiker claimed the creature seemed aware of being watched, but didn't act aggressively, just went about the business of drinking and washing itself before disappearing into the forest. Another account from 1989 came from a bow hunter who said he'd come across a Sasquatch that had been caught in an old snare trap. The hunter claimed he'd freed the creature, which had made sounds that seemed like communication before running off. The hunter never reported it officially because he was afraid of being ridiculed. Reading these stories, I felt a connection to these people, strangers who'd had their own impossible encounters and chosen to keep them quiet rather than face disbelief and mockery. I never went back to that specific logging road, but I thought about it often. I wondered if the creature had healed properly, if the wound had closed without infection. I wondered if it had family or companions somewhere in those mountains, if it had returned to them with its own strange story about the night it encountered a human. In early November, about 2 weeks after the incident, I received a package at my office. There was no return address, just my name and the DNR office location written in neat, precise handwriting. Inside was a small cedar box, the kind sold in tourist shops around the Northwest. When I opened the box, I found a single object inside, a stone. It was river-smoothed about the size of my palm, with an unusual pattern of lines etched into its surface, not natural formations, but deliberate marks that formed a simple geometric pattern. There was no note, no explanation, just the stone. I kept it on my desk, and sometimes, when I was working late and the office was empty, I'd pick it up and turn it over in my hands, tracing the etched lines with my finger. I never figured out who sent it or what it meant, but I had my theories. Rebecca left for college the following fall, heading to University of Washington to study environmental science. On the day I helped her move into her dorm, she asked me about that night again, the one where I'd said I'd seen something I couldn't explain. We were carrying boxes up 3 flights of stairs, and she brought it up casually, like she'd been thinking about it all year. "You really did see something that night, didn't you? Last October, on that timber survey." I set down the box I was carrying and looked at her. She was 18 now, about to start her own adventure, her own journey into understanding the natural world. She deserved honesty. "Yeah," I said. "I did? Was it what I think it was?" "I don't know what you think it was," she smiled. "Something amazing. Something that doesn't fit into our neat scientific categories. Something that reminds us that there are still mysteries in the world." "Yeah," I said again, feeling something loosen in my chest. It was exactly that. We didn't talk about it further, and I still didn't tell her the details. Some experiences are too personal, too profound to share completely. But I saw understanding in her eyes, and that was enough. Years later, after I retired from the DNR, I finally told the full story to Rebecca. We were hiking together in the Olympics. She was visiting from her job with the National Park Service, and we stopped for lunch near a stream, surrounded by old-growth forest that reminded me of that October night so long ago. I told her everything. The impact, the creature lying in the ditch, those intelligent eyes watching me work, the way it drank from my cup, the touch of its hand on my wrist, the slow walk into the forest, and that final wave goodbye. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "Thank you for telling me," she said finally. "And thank you for not taking photos, for not trying to prove it, for just letting it be what it was. You're not disappointed? You study wildlife. This could have been the discovery of your lifetime too." "No," she said, looking out at the forest around us. "I think you did exactly the right thing. Some things are more important than discovery. Some things deserve to remain wild and free and mysterious." We sat there in the forest, listening to the stream and the wind in the trees, and I felt at peace for the first time since that October night in 1996. I'm 70 now, and that encounter happened 24 years ago. My memory isn't what it used to be. I forget names, lose track of dates, sometimes can't remember what I had for breakfast. But I remember every detail of that night with perfect clarity. I can still see those eyes watching me in the darkness. I can still feel the warmth of that hand on my wrist. I can still hear that musical vocalization echoing through the forest. I don't know if anyone will believe this story. I don't have proof, no photos or physical evidence beyond that etched stone, which could have come from anywhere. But I know what I experienced, and I know that somewhere in the deep forests of the Cascade Mountains, there are creatures living that science hasn't acknowledged, beings that exist in the spaces between the known and the unknown. And I know that one of them, at least, understood kindness and remembered gratitude. Sometimes, late at night, I think about going back to that logging road, walking into the forest, and seeing if I could find that thicket where the creature disappeared. But I never do. That moment is complete as it is, perfect in its mystery, and some things should be left undisturbed. The forest keeps its secrets, and I'm content to let it. But every October, when the leaves turn and the mist settles over the mountains, I pour a glass of water and raise it toward the window, toward the distant peaks of the Cascades. A toast to a creature I met once on a foggy night, to a moment of connection between two beings that should never have met, and to the mysteries that still exist in the wild places of this world. I never believed in Bigfoot until the night I hit one with my truck. And what I learned in the hours that followed is that belief doesn't matter. What matters is respect, compassion, and the recognition that we share this world with wonders we may never fully understand. That's enough for me.